Sican metalworkers and Sican culture. This is the start of lecture about Sican culture, more specifically Sican metalworking. Sican metalworkers, or metalworking, is a pre-Hispanic Peruvian culture. It produced high-quality craftsmanship as far as metalworking, particularly with gold alloys and arsenic copper. Three things make this culture important. One, before this time, scientists believed that the earliest gold-making, metalworking, took place among the Incas. But the Incas are a later culture, a later race. Two, much of the workmanship that is seen with this gold metalworking from this culture took place in an earlier time. It took place from 900 to 1100 AD, which took place prior to the Inca rise. And this also took place prior to Hispanic discovery of the New World. Three, fortunately for modern-day archaeologists, this Middle Sican culture remains a mystery. For the most part, because treasure hunters looted the artifacts from the culture, little is known about this culture. It was only until about 1970s, 1980s that we knew anything about this culture because of all the looting that had occurred. What we know about artifacts came from private and public collections. The problem is that when you look at items from private collections, a lot of the pieces of the artifacts are missing, such as feathers, pigments, and other markings. Oftentimes, these are missing due to careless cleaning. As a result, only a limited amount of information can be drawn from the artifacts that are in private and public collections. In addition to our knowledge about these artifacts, we really don't know how they were produced back at this time because there were no large excavations by scientists. Another thing that occurred, as I mentioned earlier, was looting. Looting took place and really began in about the 1930s and lasted until the 1970s. It wasn't until 1978 that the first scientific excavation took place on the Sican culture that scientists began to piece together what this culture was really like. This is important to know. At one of the excavation sites, they found three interesting things. One, scientists found 1.2 tons of grave goods. Two, most of the objects that were in the site were 14 to 18 karat gold jewelry. Often the objects were tembaga. And three, this tembaga is a gold, copper, or gold-silver alloy mixture. An alloy is a mixture of two metals. At another grave site, gold cache number 1, scientists found 60 metal objects, most of which were gold sheets made of silver or tembaga. This cache consisted of 3 gold items. 1, crowns and headbands that were worn during religious ceremonies. 2, sets of fine gold feathers. These feathers were formed by pounding the gold until it was foil thin. And 3, bundles of napes. Napes are coins that were used by the Sican culture and used as money. There were not a lot of sophisticated tools in those days. Their tools were primitive tools, but they were able to do exquisite gold making. 2 facts that you should get in your notes. 1, goldsmiths use hammers. They use stone hammers and stone anvils. A stone hammer is a rock with rounded edges. They would use these hammers to pound out gold sheets. 2, handheld stone hammers commonly were made of hematite or basalt. These 2 minerals help hammer out materials. They would use one hammer to pound out the metal and then use a softer rock or rock hammer to pound out the dimples. The goldsmiths of that period had lots of expertise. They knew how to properly flatten out a piece of gold, and they knew how to make certain alloys. A goldsmith knew how to flatten out gold metals so they would flex and not break. He would flatten out these metals so they would flex for some of the headdresses for the Sican people. And he also knew how to make fine gold feathers. These feathers were very fine gold metal making. Expert metalworkers also knew how to make ear spoons. Ear spoons are very much like earrings today. Ear spoons in the Sican era were usually used for headdresses. Ear spoons had lots of detailed work. Each ear spoon was about 3 inches in diameter, finely decorated, and served as metalworking that was well ahead of its time. Another trait of goldsmiths was to join two metals together to form an alloy, such as gold and silver. It is important to know that they would join the two metals using organic glue, would heat it, and wherever the two metals touched, they would form an alloy only at that spot. One last trick that should be remembered is that goldsmiths were able to use a technique called depletion gilding. Depletion gilding dissolved the base metals away, and the gold sheets would then appear like 24 karat gold. This would turn into what they called a tembaga. A tembaga sheet looks like 24 karat gold, but is actually of lesser quality and only worth 10 to 14 carats. But because they used technique, their gold objects had a much higher quality. Not all of the pieces were of high quality that they found. For example, they found one grave site, a beaker with a portion of the rim and the silver base was melted. At the base, it showed what they call an orange peel texture, which is often the result of overheating. So not all of the gold pieces that they found were perfect. Also, metalworkers did some experimenting with metals. Some metalworkers made no attempt to correct their errors when finishing objects. So this kind of error generally indicated it was done by an apprentice worker. In another case, they found a ceremonial mask, and the front portion was perfect, but yet the back had defects. Scientists believe that the goldsmith completed the front and then turned it over to his apprentice. For objects that were found in the tombs, we now know different aspects about their culture. For instance, we know that because they invested so much time and effort into metalworking, that metal objects had strong meaning for these people. Gold had the highest value. It was usually reserved for art or a symbol of artistic expression. They would use it to draw figures as an act of artistic expression. It's also important to remember two other aspects of the Sican culture. One is that gold was reserved for the highest class of people. Of course, in that time, there were different classes of people. Whoever was in the highest class had the highest quality of gold, often pure gold or 24 karat gold. The next class of people used tembaga, and they would often use this tembaga to emulate the highest class. They would decorate themselves with tembaga, again a lower carat of gold, as a substitute for pure gold. Many of the precious objects found in the tombs were by people in public settings. At times, they used their gold or tembaga to impress onlookers, or it was used in religious ceremonies. The last important aspect that you should remember is that, one, when they did excavation of the highest leaders, they were buried with large scrap piles of tembaga and scrap piles of other precious metals. They were buried with them in the burial chamber, and the more scrap, the higher the stature in the Sican culture. And two, the presence of scrap in tombs represented the political power of the person. This ends your lecture on Sican metalworkers and Sican culture.